Well, Cardell Potter, welcome to the show. And man, I appreciate you making the time to make this happen.
Yeah, thanks for the invite. I really appreciate it. I know we'd been touched a little bit, and life kind of got in the way and slowed it down a little bit. So had some free time here, and things worked out good. So happy to be out here and happy to do it.
Yeah, no, some of the best episodes take a little long to finally line up, so that always works out. But no, I'm excited, really excited for this one. I'm always excited for him. But we were talking a little bit beforehand, like kind of like the first, I'm going to say, dual sport athlete that I've had on, where you spent a lot of time, the snowmobiles and the stock car stuff, which we raced against each other in the stock car world. So I feel like we kind of got two different tales to tell, and I'm pretty excited to ask what it was like through your times when you're doing both, because I did one as much as I could, and I felt like that was enough going on in my life. So I can't imagine what it was like doing both.
Yeah, definitely. No, is very busy, but obviously had a lot of fun over the years doing it. Thankful for the opportunities. Racing the snowmobiles, and then kind of progressing into some stock car racing throughout the years there. So. Everybody would always say once in a while, like, oh, it's got to be, something similar about it. It's like, it's racing. I mean, that's similar. But other than that, no, not a whole lot of aspects of it were really similar. So definitely fun. Like I said, I had a lot of fun, getting to, tour new tracks, meet different people, a lot of relationships, been built, at the racetrack,
right.
and lifelong friendships essentially too.
Yeah. Yeah. And so before we really delve all into that, so I know you come from a cranberry marshing family. What did life look like even before you started racing, and from when you can kind of remember childhood?
Yeah, definitely. Grew up, on my family farm, Cranberry Marsh there. So it was my dad and his two brothers there owned a Cranberry Marsh. So grew up on that. Anything outdoors was kind of right up my alley. We lived in the country. My mom worked outside of the home there as well. Kind of always thought cranberries was going to be something that I would do forever. Obviously led, into a different opportunity later on, but like I said, I had fun. I did some testing right out at the home marsh, and everything that goes with it. A lot of hours in the shop, working on stuff. Obviously we had a good setup there, as far as tools and equipment needed to kind of build some parts that we would need, or if we got, a wild idea and wanted to try something new, it's easy to run to the shop, jump on the mill, grab the lathe, and do whatever needed to, create maybe a crazy idea or whatever it might be. And, a lot of that kind of led to, things that my dad had learned at work, to where he was hands-on, mechanically, welding, fabricating, every aspect of it that goes with it. He felt comfortable in doing and could kind of really lead the charge there.
Yeah, it always helps when you have someone that's got all those abilities. I can relate to that.
Yeah, definitely.
So when did because you started snowmobile racing first, so were snowmobiles kind of always a big part of your family's life, or did it just something that you guys kind of picked up and went with?
So to touch on it a little bit there, my dad was kind of always big into racing in general, whether it was snowmobiles. He did a little bit of stock car stuff, so at La Crosse, Dells, Toma Speedway, he'd do some of that. So he did more of the car stuff, but he liked going to like Eagle River, watching World Championship weekend. They'd go up there. Probably have more fun than what they should, but they always had a good time going up there, big group of them. So we kind of knew a lot of the names, many years ago. And then from there, we had, a family friend that did some drag racing in the winter time, and kind of led to the kitty cat racing with the snowmobiles. So that's when it all started. We went to, I remember the location. It was a hockey rink there. Or I apologize, actually back up. We did a grass one in the summertime at Wild Rose. That was the very first one. I think I was probably 4, and then that winter we did, a couple ice ones in the hockey rink and Rock
was it
Carlson.
like a grass drag or a grass
ice ovals? So they'd put like the wheel kits on the front of them.
No kidding. Okay.
All I remember is about 100 degrees out. I felt like that day, and kind of just stuck, and we did great the first time we went out. We ended up winning, whatever it was, probably amateur kitty cat or something goofy like that, and won. And then we kind of had a slow spell for quite a while, but had a lot of fun with it. And mainly the fun came because, my parents and grandparents were a huge part of it. So,
Yeah.
we got to travel around, and go racing in the wintertime and do that, and kind of kept progressing, as I got older to whatever the next level was, or whether it was, 120s or juniors, and kind of kept moving our way up. And like I said, the snowmobile stuff was just something that worked good for us. We had a lot of fun doing it. I had help early on from Rob Carlson, and he was, drag racing snowmobiles in the winter. And then when we got, older and into more of the champ racing type stuff, then it came full circle to where he came and helped us and some of his crew guys and friends, and kind of put essentially our team together, and just kind of that core group from there on out.
Yeah. At what point, as you were doing, kitty cat snowmobiles and kind of those, 120 lower levels, had you been going and watching races at Eagle River, and like as you're getting older thinking, hey, I'm going to hopefully do that at some point?
Yeah, I think the thought was always there. On Eagle River weekend, we were always kitty cat racing as well. So sometimes we'd get to go do something on Friday night on the front stretch. They'd set up a real tight track on the front stretch.
Yeah, I would imagine it'd be tight there.
We'd be out there racing, and you never failed. Typical Eagle River weekend has always felt like negative, whatever, super cold. And did that, and that was kind of always, we just always kept kind of wanting to progress to what was next, and kind of kept moving up, and just kept having fun with it along the way. Essentially, at the end of the day, having fun was the main thing. As long as we were having fun, it was easier to keep wanting to go do it. So that's kind of what led it there. And as I got older, just progressing into the next level of stuff. So
okay, and before you, once you started, racing on like half-mile tracks and tracks of that size, what classes were you a part of that before you went to Pro Champ to get you to that?
Yeah, so with the kitty cat clubs there, they'd have the junior 340 stuff, and those we'd do a lot of the real small track on the lakes type of stuff.
Okay.
But then Eagle River, they'd let you run on the big track, so that was like the cool opportunity where you really got to get on a big track. With that, it's nerve-wracking because you'd go, this itty-bitty track to Eagle River was pretty intimidating.
Yeah, I would imagine.
So we did that, and like I said, once I kind of aged out of that, then we got into more of the sprint racing. Ended up buying our first sprint sled, which I think would have been, they classify a wall, 4-bar chassis for Matt Schultz. So we went up by Matt and Al Fenhouse and ended up buying that, and just kind of dabbling our toes in it. We didn't have a clue what we were doing, in that aspect. It was a whole different world, the sprint racing. And started with that chassis, ran Junior 1 sprints, and then that next year we ended up buying a Wall, at that time, A-arm chassis. I think it was Terry Wall's 2006 A-arm sled, or what we'd call, I guess, the A-arm style chassis. They're kind of their tried and true that they had for a long period of time. So we bought that one used through Walls. And took that sprint racing, and then the addiction started. Kind of from there on out, then we ended up picking up another, a new Wall chassis in 08, and then, that would have been 07, 08. My dad ended up building one himself, essentially kind of did...
Like the entire frame and everything?
Everything.
Okay, gotcha.
So he did, all the fabricating, all the cutting, fitting, forming, did everything there, and that was what we called our 08 chassis.
Okay.
Did that one, and I think that was like a Pro Sprint 600 sled, and, free air motor at that time, something different we were doing, and kept doing that. And then from there, we kind of stopped buying and building chassis, and those were the ones that we used from there on out once we got to the Pro Champ level.
No kidding, okay.
And I'm trying to think here. Our first year would have been 2008. Pro Champ racing, we went and did that, and like I said, that's when the addiction started, and we were just all in at that point.
Sure. And another thing I want to comment on, building your own chassis. I mean, it's almost more work building all of the fixturing just to just to build it itself. I mean, just you have the bars for the chassis, but I mean, there's a lot that goes into just the fixturing, so you can rebuild the thing. God forbid you have to rebuild it or build a second one. And
exactly. And like you said, we had to have the parts, for 3 sleds as well. So we tried having good inventory. You'd hate if you would crash anything, but you had to have backup stuff.
Yeah.
You couldn't always count on walls to have stuff. Usually they did, but we wanted to make sure that we had stuff, formed up, fit, ready to go, that, if you were in a, fire drill to get it done, you could get it together and get back out there and give yourself another opportunity. And, like I said, in 08 was our first year in champ, and, it started out good. Didn't know what to expect. I mean, the speed, the horsepower difference is just mind-blowing. I mean, it didn't have a good understanding of what the next step really looked like until we got there. And we, I think, went to Rock Rapids, Iowa for our first pro champ race. We were going to run semi-pro. We ran pretty good. And also with that, I learned that I was exhausted at the end of the weekend.
Sure.
I needed to, get physically better with, the upgrade and everything. And then our next race, we went to Plymouth, which was Plymouth used to be the one always right before Eagle River. So we would do that one, and majority of the guys went, but not all of them, and we ended up winning that weekend. So we got our first pro champ win, sent good momentum into Eagle River, and then we got to Eagle River for our first, WC weekend. Super nervous. My mom was on top getting us scheduled for the weekend, God bless her, and they always did it on whoever entered first. Well, we were the first ones out to qualify, and they never used to do practice back then, or at that time frame for Eagle River in 08. And so the track was just glare ice. I was super nervous, first one out of the chute, ready to go. And I just remember that I was so nervous I forgot to turn the lube tank on to go out, and we still qualified 7th, and I was pumped about that, and then frustrated.
I mean, it probably slowed you down quite a bit.
I had to. I mean, it's just glare ice, just like a hockey rink out there. And, that was kind of the start of our pro champ. And then after that, things, that first year went really good, and then we struggled for quite a while there, and just couldn't get much clicking, on the Pro 600, on the Pro Champ, because at that time you'd run Pro 600 too.
Okay, I remember that class.
So a lot of guys had, I shouldn't say a lot, but some had, 2 sleds where they'd have a 600 and a 440, and we dabbled with both there, and, just couldn't ever get that package going again. We were just always, we would run okay, but we weren't ever a, front runner there. And then I would say about 2014, then we started kind of progressing and getting things dialed in, and started getting a little bit more consistency, and obviously, working out, just getting in shape, all aspects of it kind of got to where I'd hoped that we could end up at some point.
Right. Yeah. And before we get too far along, kind of one of the reasons in asking, between after Kitty Cat stuff, like what classes you took in order to progress to, Pro Champ 440s, because, obviously having watched those sleds and seen how fast they are, what was that initial thought when you jumped on it for the first time and grabbed a handful of throttle and took off?
Yeah, it's hard to even put into words. I mean, honestly, not taking away from the other sleds, but they're slow compared to a Pro Champ sled. I mean, just the throttle response, how much, essentially you'd see a lot of them guys. I mean, Dustin Wall, for example, when he had his Pro 600, he could be rolling 15, 20 miles an hour and crack the throttle, and he'd yank both skis off the ground, no problem every time. Yeah. And, just the raw horsepower that was there was always unreal, and the speeds that you could hit. I mean, man, I wouldn't even know what to guess at some of the bigger tracks with the Pro 600s, but I mean, they'd be upwards of 110.
Because were the Pro 600s faster than the 440, the Motto 440s?
Yeah,
that's what I thought.
Yeah, they were quicker, and with that, came more difficulties in handling and getting them dialed in, because there was just that much more torque and horsepower that went with them. That
right.
Matt Schultz obviously had a really fast Pro 600. Dustin Wall had a really good one. Those were two.
Sure.
For example, that just were top notch, really fast, and like I said, you'd see that just rolling out on the track, the difference in the speed and everything.
To kind of a little more on the technical side, and I remember that the 600s being, faster than the Pro Champs. What what made the pro champs the premier class versus, a class that was faster? Because usually, it's, the other way around in, a lot of other areas.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know if I have 100% accurate of an answer for that. I think, kind of leading up to it, the Pro 440 was just kind of always the premier one.
Yeah.
Parts, at that time, parts were more available. It was kind of what was initially started, and then they essentially added, I believe, the 600, and I might have that mixed up a little bit, but the 440 was, like I said, the tried and true, where
Sure.
it was at, all the great engine builders, worked and focused right on that.
On that package, yeah.
The WC, you'd build 1 million sets of pipes and cylinders and everything you could dream up to try, because it all went effort-wise right into the 440. And some guys that would run with the 600, they'd use their 440s and use it as a test session. So they kind of knew that, maybe they were at a disadvantage to a good 600, but they wanted to use it to test, get better the weekend, to kind of learn what they needed, come Sunday on the main program, essentially.
Right. Now, and so I had, we both know Cody Knutson. I had him on, and one thing I never really asked, and I've thought about a million questions on the ice oval side of things that I've kind of wondered about. So you kind of started talking about as you started, coming into 2014, working out more kind of workout regimen stuff. And obviously in a stock car, like, yeah, you got hot days, and yeah, you can get wore out in a race at a, more physical, rough track. But, what is the physicality like of, you're just talking about the speed of hanging on to a Champ 440, but now you're hanging off to the left, dragging your knee on the ice. Yeah, I mean, and going over, bumps and ruts and, racing at 100 and some miles an hour. What is that physicality portion of that like?
Yeah, it's hard to put into words, because there's a lot of body parts that you're using, like you talked about. You're hanging over the edge, you're holding on tight. You gotta wipe your visor going down the straightaway. So there's a lot of elements that are physically draining, and the fact that it's such a quick race, say 25 lap at Eagle River. Doesn't seem like that much, but when you're hanging on for dear life and you have a death grip of 100%, it's hard to hold, something at 100% for a long period of time. And that's where, the training and where I think everybody as a whole, all the racers, knew how important that, the sleds kept getting closer and closer package-wise, that then the only advantage is, are you a little bit stronger to go faster the last 3 laps of the race? Or, can you maybe lean just a little bit harder in the corner than the other guy because you're not tired? So then that's kind of where, that next level, kind of kept raising. And I know we always had that, prior to, say, my days of the Pro Champ racing, because way back when, those guys were still, they were old school, and they were still, putting in the work and doing everything needed and testing. It just, at that point, like you said, I think the competition just kept narrowing in closer and closer, that, there easily was 10 guys that could win every single weekend. So yeah, you would work on the, the forearm strength, just the overall core and cardio, because if your breathing got way off, then you're not focused at, okay, was I faster that lap, or was I maybe slower, and you need to try and have that mental clarity to make good decisions and enter the corner where you think you're faster, or not make those mistakes. And that's kind of where it came down to. And for me personally, like I said, about that 2014 is when I kind of got more into a rhythm and understanding what was needed to run at a higher level at that point.
And I mean, would you have instances where you're running someone down and you're catching them, and maybe you're faster in general, but you can just see that rider's being a little bit lazy, and you can tell they're not quite hanging off the way they should because they're tired? I mean, could you tell that in other riders at times? Yeah,
you definitely could. And a couple of reasons for that, just if their sled wasn't handling right, it makes it a lot harder. Because I've been there too, where there might have been a weekend where I was still in great shape and was feeling good, but if the sled was off, man, it drains so much more out of you faster, that you could see and know that, all right, if we're in a longer race and it's a physical track, where you don't get a break, say a Wausau, for example, where you're always kind of turning, you don't get that 1 second to catch your breath, that if their sled wasn't handling right, you would know that it's going to physically wear them down just a little bit quicker. And so you'd kind of, you'd get to learn, throughout the heat races in the day and or the year, if somebody had a good handling sled, okay, they're maybe not going to get tired as fast. But if their sled's not handling good, that's an area that maybe you could capitalize on.
Sure. And I remember, like, like you said, like a track like Wausau where you are kind of turning a little bit all the time. I mean, did that, obviously it's not as banked as like what Eagle River is, but just having that factor where you're having that to turn a little bit all the time, did that add that much to, a physical standpoint?
It would, in a different way, and that's where I said, you had to essentially be kind of well-rounded on all aspects of, being in good shape, because, Wausau, like you said, you're always turning, you're always leaning, so the nice thing was is though you'd stay kind of hanging off the sled the whole way around, so you're using a little bit more forearm strength, maybe not as much leg muscle or core.
Sure.
Where Eagle River, you're using arm muscle, forearms in the corner. You get to sit up on the straightaway, sit up straight. So then you're, when you're sitting up straight, you're not using your legs or your core as much, and you're, leaning down into the corner. So, and that's where you kind of had to be more well-rounded and in knowing what you needed, come race time.
Okay. No, that makes sense. So, as you kind of said, you were putting that more together as far as, getting into 14, things were maybe starting to get a little better, workout regimen, stuff like that. So you obviously, and I would like to really talk about that too. You end up winning the world championships in 2015. But kind of, backing up a year or so before then, when did you really feel like you were start coming on? Because I remember, you won that race. And then, you had some really good seasons. I mean, really to end your career. I mean, you were always at the top, it seemed like.
Yeah, definitely. Like I said, 14 was kind of the start of what was heading in a good direction. I think that last race there at Wyawega, we ran well that weekend, ending the year, ended on kind of a positive. And then in 15, the year started out good at Ironwood. I don't think we went to Beausejour that year, so it was good at Ironwood, and then headed to Eagle River. So, the whole weekend went good. It was a wild ride, WC weekend from, basically the time we got there. We felt like we had a good sled. And was able to bring it home. Obviously had kind of an interesting start to, us being in the back row and working our way through traffic, and then ultimately winning the WC there.
Sure. So you came from the back row that year. I don't remember.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that was, you were announcing.
I know. I was. I remember that. The memory came up on Facebook the other day, but yeah, no, I didn't remember you coming from the back row. I just didn't have that.
Yeah. So what happened? A little backstory on it. There we had I think it was Friday morning. So we ran Friday night. We were pretty decent Friday night. Happy with where we're at. I think we qualified decent. We knew we needed a little bit more to have a chance at winning it there. And we had a new set of pipes, and we wanted to try those out. New wrap, everything. We went out there in hot laps Friday morning, and man, it was blistering fast, Friday morning, and we come in off the track, and they ended up catching on fire. And I mean, there's flames, that high coming off the top of it.
No kidding.
We pulled the hood off and kind of melted a bunch of wires, and we knew that they were new pipes and they were good, and the data looked good, and we're a little gun shy heading into Friday nights. We're like, well, we can't run those pipes. Put the old pipes on. In the meantime, we were, I don't know, trying to get creative. We were out there with the blowtorch trying to melt these pipes in to get all the glue, and how we did it, glue
Sure.
off them so they didn't flame up, but we didn't feel like we could chance it. I mean, I wasn't going to burn the whole sled down, over a set of pipes. And Friday night, like I said, ran good, but knew we didn't have a shot to win. Went into Saturday. How did that go? Yeah, went into Saturday. First qualifier went good. Second qualifier, which is the final one, off the start, I kind of hole shotted. And Eagle River's kind of unique that, they have more ice on the outside, a little less on the inside, because it sort of almost kind of tails off. Well,
Okay.
Where I lined up wasn't a great spot, and it kind of hole shotted, and it pulled right and ended up crashing going into turn one. So we didn't even make the front row.
Okay.
So then we Sunday morning we went and went to the test track there. Tommy helped us out with, and went and tested, got those pipes out there, wanted to break them in some more. They ran good. We worked on some things, got it better, went into the LCQ, and ended up advancing through the LCQ to start in the back row for the WC. So, like I said, kind of a eventful weekend, but I'll never forget those pipes catching on fire, and me and my crew guy Robert there, our eyes were as big as saucers, like, now what do we do? And the guy's like, well, should I dump snow on? Well, yeah, I mean, I what else are you gonna do? And just petrified, because in the moment you're never not expecting a snowmobile to catch on fire. I mean, that's kind of not common, I guess. So definitely eventful, and it's added to the memory.
And in having to start in the back row, how much more of an element does that add to trying to get out front? I mean, obviously you're starting some lengths back, but
yeah, I would say one thing I know out of all the WCs going into that one, it was the least amount of stress I had, because I knew I couldn't go any further back.
Sure.
As worse could be at that point.
Up from here, yeah.
And maybe that helped a little bit. Like I said, I didn't have quite the stress. I think anybody that's done Eagle River in the WC knows that there's just a unique, stress and feeling that you get, heading into the weekend. Everybody can talk tough and say, I'm not nervous, it's just another race. Kind of hard to say with 100% honesty that, you don't have some sort of butterflies or feeling knowing that it's the biggest race of the year. It's the one that everybody's, chasing. So like I said, my stress level was definitely down. I was comfortable. And the other piece of it is we'd been at the test track that morning. We ran the LCQ. We didn't have time to hardly think about anything else. We had to get a sealed jug of gas. We're busy running around trying to find that. It was just a fire drill to even make it up to the starting grid on time, I felt like, so I didn't have much of an opportunity to overthink it at that point. Sure.
And another thing, I mean, I guess I should remember, but did they have a break that year, or was it 25 straight?
Yeah, no, that was kind of newer at that time, but I don't know if it might have been like the second or third year that they did it, but it was 10 laps, 10-minute break where you could do gas, lube, any adjustments to the sled that you needed, and then another 20 laps. So it was 30 laps total. So we got a good go there the first 10 laps. I think I got up to third. And we made some small changes, nothing, obviously happy where I was at, surprised at where I was at. And then on the restart, I think I fell back to fourth and then got back to third and slowly started catching Matt Schultz and Malcolm Chartier. And then a caution came out with 7 to go. And then I had a great restart there with 7 to go, was able to get by both Matt and Malcolm. I kind of opened up a little bit of a gap, and then my belt started slipping. I could hear it in the corners slipping, and I always, watch back the video. The one time you could see me shaking my head because all I could think is it's over. It's gonna blow it. Any minute, because I knew it was happening. And Malcolm got back to me and almost inside of us, and then. On that white flag lap, then I was able to gap him a little bit and ended up winning it. So I got the primary clutch and the belt saved with the trophy because there's cords on the belt coming out.
No kidding, that's cool.
Primary clutch was cracked, and
really,
so kind of a keepsake, and like I said, it just added to the whole weekend that everything that could went wrong did, and then in full circle, was able to still have the luck that ended up getting essentially my second pro champ win was the WC.
Sure.
So pretty special there.
Yeah. And around those times too, and beating Malcolm, I think, he was probably coming off of 2 past maybe WCs, or at least right around there for sure.
Yeah, he had won the 2 previous to that, and was, on a huge hot streak for sure, winning a lot, riding really well. Obviously Matt Schultz, super fast, wins at Eagle River as well. So, I kind of felt like, I was fortunate in a way, and I know, just because I wasn't part of maybe that older generation, they had great racing as well, but I feel fortunate that there was a really large gap, whether it's, say 2010 to, whenever, 20, however long, but, where there's some phenomenal races, the PJ Wanderscheid, Gary Moyle finish, Gary on the top, PJ on the bottom. Amazing race there, Brian Busick getting a couple wins, PJ, getting, whatever.
He's got 4.
Yeah, 4.
Yeah.
Just a lot of great races, really. Nick Van Stradonk had an awesome win, I think, in 2012, where he come very deep in the field, made some awesome passes, and kind of honestly, a lot of great shows for the fans. There's hardly ever any snoozers at Eagle River. I feel like they're always exciting races.
Yeah, and I mean, just the obviously the drivers themselves. I'll never forget. I don't remember what year that was either, and I feel like I almost might have been announcing at that too. I don't know if it was a Friday Night Thunder or what it might have been, but I remember Nick Van Stradonk picking up his sled and carrying it across the finish line, and that was pretty badass.
Yeah.
That was cool.
Yeah, I remember that.
And then that was just to make it to the break so he could change a belt or whatever he had going on and keep going. That was cool.
Yeah, I remember that, and like you said, a lot of special moments of those types of things. Yeah, I think like the one year, I think PJ broke his right leg or ankle. I don't remember exactly. But, he had to change up his sled a little bit to try and get there. And, I think that just showed, the level of commitment that, at that time the, pro champ guys had, that they would go the extra mile. There was nothing out of bounds. If it was a broken bone, an injury, a crazy design. I mean, Gary Moyle, I feel like, was the king of that. If anybody was going to bring some wild design or cool looking sled or think outside the box, I felt like Gary Moyle was the guy. And that's what was exciting about Pro Champ race. And I feel like is you could really get creative. You could do a lot of neat stuff, and you just had to keep putting in the work, I feel like.
Yeah. And I remember when carbon fiber started becoming a big thing. I mean, was carbon fiber always around, or did that kind of start coming in mid-2000s-ish time frame, like 2010-ish era?
Yeah, it was always around, with the, same deal, titanium, all the fancy metals and everything that goes with it. And it got to where it got almost a little too extreme, and I think maybe the sport recognized it late. Obviously, it was fun, and it was part of that where we were trying to get creative with that stuff as well. Obviously, worked closely with TJ Patrick.
Oh, sure, that's right.
And doing a lot of stuff there, and I feel like Matt Schultz built that one sled I think he won with in 2010, and Johnny Huntington there, he built a large part of that and had a big hand in it, and they went the extra mile on the detail, lightening it, just super fancy. And I feel like that was like that next step up, when they built that sled, and then that's when everybody on all levels started kept improving their game on how their air boxes were, and track designs and stud patterns, and like you said, carbon fiber and clutches, and just everything that you could do there really was pretty neat.
Yeah, no, for sure. And just having, being kind of followed Cody Knutsen's career a little bit and kind of hanging around a little bit that I did of his racing, I mean, I was amazed at just all the stuff that, just the different, like you said, different stud patterns, and of course, being titanium, and just all the stuff that would just go into clutching and the motors and the pipes. Obviously you talked about that, but just so many different things, and minute things that make such a huge difference. That obviously you have a similar thing in a stock car, but obviously in a snowmobile it's so much different. It was so interesting, and seeing the different things that go on to try and find a balance for a rider with the changing snow conditions. And on an asphalt track you deal with hot and cold, and there's rubber on it or there's not, but I mean there's a wide variety of factors on temperature when it comes to the snowmobile side of things.
Right. Yeah, and that's just it. And that's where, like I said, there's so many areas that you could touch on to keep working and improving: pipes, clutching, engine packages, cylinders, and and that's where it got addicting in a way. Like I said, you'd get addicted to want to try more, and then, you'd think that like you peaked and you can't think of dreaming up anything more, and then the next morning would roll around and you'd come up with 10 more ideas, and you'd want to try this or throw this combination together, and it never ended. And that was the same with engines. We worked closely with Larry Rugland, and he would give ideas and do some engine dynoing and testing that way, that you're essentially working on stuff year round, to keep building the program and get an inventory that you could throw this pipe package together with these cylinders or whatever it may be. And And then when Larry was kind of done there towards the end, we dabbled in, doing some engine dynoing on our own, to learn some more. And same deal. Like I said, you'd have 10 things you'd want to try. Well, that 10 things would turn to 20 things. And then you think, all right, we can't dream up any more ideas. And next thing you know, we're out there the next night, late at night doing engine, dynos. And that's, like I said, it's an addiction. That's what it comes down to.
Now, having, when you guys are doing your own chassis and then, going on to doing your own motors, was there ever a point where you're like, you kind of felt on an island because, you had your own thing, or did you always kind of feel, hey, we have an upper hand, obviously it's up to us, but we have an upper hand because we got our own thing going on that no one else has?
Yeah, and that's a good point, or I'm actually glad you brought that up. So, I talked earlier, my dad built that one in '08, and then I think the summer 2015, my dad built another one. They're identical. They're supposed to be duplicates, but for whatever reason, that '07 sled versus our '08 sled, they were night and day difference. We could not get them to drive the same. I hate to say it, I hated driving that '08 sled. I did not like it. Kind of hurt my dad's feelings a little bit. He was kind of disappointed, and talked him into, building another one in 15 there, and that one was actually good. Off the same jig, essentially did the same thing. We didn't change anything on it. And I don't know. It's hard to explain. I mean, that with car racing, you can build the same chassis on the same jigs, and sometimes they are just different, and you don't know why. And that's what happened with that one. So our 15 sled was what I felt, with a few tweaks, as good as our '07 sled. And, that kind of opened up more opportunities that then, we could essentially try and be quicker on Saturdays and Sundays, where we got to the point knowing our '07 sled was better, we'd try and save that one for Sundays, a little bit more important, and didn't want to chance any issues with that. But our '07 sled was our one that we used all the time for the WCs. That one had the most miles on it for sure. And so I know that was exciting and good for my dad that, like I said, he got another crack at building one, and at least now he knows that it was good, and he was happier about it, and never explains the unanswered question, but I know he was pretty excited about it.
Yeah, and I don't know the technical name for him, but the one thing I always noticed about you and your sleds is a lot of the guys were changing to those hoods where they were, more looked like a factory snowmobile, but you kind of stayed with them. I'm going to call it the big bubble hood. Yep. I don't know what the rightful name is for them, but you kind of stayed with that. Did you feel that there was like an aerodynamic advantage with that? I mean, I would almost think so, but, I'll kind of let you speak to that.
Yeah, and I felt there was, I felt that it fit our package good. Like you said, it would give us a little bit more downforce, I thought. Okay. And I kind of accidentally stumbled on it very early on. We were doing some testing and, just thought it was easier to, we could get more runs in if we didn't have to take the hood on and off. And then I realized, not knowing the importance of aerodynamics and downforce, that, man, the hood, gives a lot of downforce. Like, you need this. And then from there, not only did we kind of stick with that hood, but we made a few other tweaks, on some different areas to try and get more downforce. So later on, we, added some wings to the left front.
I was going to ask you about that.
We would do, wing on the rear. And like I said, we just knew that every little bit was so important that we wanted to start dabbling in aspects of that.
Yeah, you kind of had that, the wing on the back. I mean, I'm assuming yes, since you stuck with it, but could you feel a large difference?
Yeah, I definitely could. And in certain tracks, it was better than others. And then that's where we had to be easier at taking it on and off, because sometimes I'd like it and sometimes I wouldn't. And that's where it came into play that, is important. But we had that idea, and we went to Beaujeu for the last race. I don't even know which year exactly, but we talked about it, and we're like, well, let's test one. Let's just throw one together. We'll try something, see how it works. And man, I went out and I'm like, it's good. Like, I liked it. I think we can improve on it. I'm like, let's take it off. Like, I don't want anybody to see it heading into the end of the year. I don't want anybody heading into next year to think, oh, he ran it all weekend. Maybe he liked it. I wanted to try and have that one leg up. Then we took the off season, kind of redesigned, kind of made them a little bit more efficient, made them better, and then headed into the year. And same deal. I could feel a difference. Some tracks, Ironwood specifically, where, if we'd run two wings normally, two wings was almost too much there. It was
You would run 2 rings on the tunnel?
on the left front.
On the left front, okay.
Yeah, so on the left front, we had run 2, but like at Ironwood, I ended up having to take one off up there because I just remember getting into turn 1 at Ironwood. I had so much downforce on the left front that my right front ski would come off the ground entering the corner. So, you're kind of leaning into the corner. Right front ski would come off, and then it would touch down, and then you'd turn. And that was the scariest thing I ever knew, because why on earth would the right ski come off? And it
probably an odd feeling.
To just so much downforce on the left front that kind of changed aspects. And like I keep going back to, that's the addiction. Like I said, you just kept wanting more. You kept wanting to get, that next step, and trying to be creative on all levels and explore new options, really.
Yeah, no, that's I think that's, like you said, that's the part that makes racing awesome, and like it is addicting. So, yeah, no, that's cool.
Yeah, for sure, definitely a lot of fun. Like I said, a lot of good memories. We got one sled of ours is up at the Eagle River Hall of Fame, so happy to have that there. Obviously, just a lot of memories working on this stuff as a family. Knowing that my dad put in as much work as he did, it was important for us to want to be able to, leave it up there and let people look at it and kind of remember, a small era of when we were racing, essentially. And honestly, all the, good people that went with us. Like I said, we had a great group of guys that went with us consistently every weekend, testing. My one buddy would go work out with me, and it was just that little extra, that you always needed from somebody. And, the testing, the clutching, just all aspects of it. We had such a great group of guys, a lot of laughs in the trailer, for sure. And that's what made it, ultimately so much fun there.
Yeah. And how did you won the WC in 15, and I know you accumulated numerous wins after that. How many more years did you race for after that? 2, 3?
I got to think here. It's been, we did, I think, 4 more after that. So I won the TLR Cup in 2015, and then, had some good years after that. And then that last year, just kind of had a rough go at Eagle River, ended up crashing and kind of tweaked my ankle a little bit, and just went into, my safety lap on Sunday that last year. It wasn't feeling it. My ankle was not great, and it was the left one, which makes it hard to pivot. And, it just, at that point, I kind of knew in my heart that it wasn't there anymore, that it's time to kind of, I guess, be an adult and realize that I got a job to go to each day, and that, I didn't want to be injured, and, and if you can feel it in your head, then it's not worth it. It's not good for anybody else on the racetrack. And that's kind of where it came down to. And the fact that I knew, I was very fortunate. I had a long career doing it, had a lot of fun. I was happy and healthy, where I was at the end of it.
Yeah. Now, that's a good point too, with, you have all 11 other sleds out there that have, carbides and picks. I'm assuming, obviously you probably didn't worry about it that much, because otherwise, like you said, you wouldn't be able to race as good as you did. But did you ever, and maybe in the earlier days, worry about it more? The fact of man, I could really get banged up doing this.
Yeah, you would. There'd be a small part of you that would be worried about it. And then, I feel like you get in the track and you get in your routine, and, any of those thoughts would kind of go away. I do feel very fortunate. I kind of was thinking about that, at one point or another, but there was a lot of really great snowmobile racers that I got to race with, that felt confident to be around, that would race hard but clean. They all had a really high level of respect for each other. So I feel like that helped a lot. There wasn't necessarily wild card out there to where you'd have to be nervous. Obviously, there's maybe a couple that were maybe a little bit more cautious around at certain times, but for the most part, for me, I felt very fortunate with all the guys that we were racing with to be, in a good class.
Yeah, you knew they were going to respect you, and you could respect them the way they were going to drive you.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And that's that was a nice thing, that I felt like, there's a lot of good talent really on all levels.
Yeah. It's awesome. And so you go and you kind of decide to end. When you ran your last race, did you know, hey, this is the last one?
Yeah, I knew, I could feel it, I could tell, it was harder. My dad was, making his transition with, his work and everything there. I had moved up to Wisconsin Rapids, so,
Sure.
I wasn't as available as much to help in the shop.
Yeah.
So, you just kind of had that feel that, that was the first winter where by the first race I was exhausted and we hadn't even been to the first race. And I'm like, this is not good. You're supposed to be exhausted at the last race. And
Yeah.
I'm at the first race and I'm just like burned out, I loved the racing and I was excited about it. But that was the first time in my head where I'm like, this might be the first sign that it's time. And then, like I said, kind of had a rough go at Eagle River and just didn't feel it. I didn't have that feeling that I always had in the past. And like I said, I was happy with my career, and just kind of knew it. Like I said, I think the worst for me was, boy, I get sad thinking about it. is leaving Monday morning from Eagle River. That one was hard, So you spent your whole life, how it is, you race too, you can relate, but you spend your whole life focused on one thing. Wow.
No, take your time, and it shows how much you love it. I mean, any of us that's been involved in it that deep, it's hard to let go of it, even if you know, hey, I got to put it down. It's, like you said, it's an addiction. It's,
it is. And like I said, I keep saying that, but that's how it was. And when I left Monday morning from Eagle River, that was difficult because I knew that was the end of it. And I just, I knew I couldn't look back at that point, but I was overall happy, with my career.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's the important part, is being able to, look back and feel, hey, I accomplished things that a lot of other people weren't able to. And yeah, that's the important, walk away as healthy as can be. And, you didn't, there's people that aren't as fortunate to walk away from that sport and, in good condition and by any means too.
Yeah, exactly. And like you said, I couldn't have did it without great crew guys, call them crew guys, but they're our best friends,
Yeah, family, right? The racing family.
Definitely they're obviously my parents and grandparents. We had great sponsors that were with us for a long period of time, that kind of helped make it all happen. Essentially that's what it was important for us and what made it fun and wanting to keep going to the racetrack. So obviously, good things got to come to an end eventually, and thankful, you can relate, with your parents and grandparents that, same for me with my parents and grandparents being able to go on the track. My grandma would sit up on the hill all day long and freeze her tail off and love every minute of it. And my grandpa would watch the board from morning till night to make sure that we didn't miss a race. And he would be the first one pushing that sled up the hill all day, every day, just never ending there. And that was cool and extra special.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a cool thing. Like you said, I know that, it's like too, having all that family there, but yeah, that is special. And obviously, I've seen, your whole family around there, and it's cool to, people talk about the racing family. You have people that aren't actually in your family and you call them your racing family, but then to actually have, that a large portion of your family, a part of it is, and have a, and playing a crucial role is a fun thing. It's cool. It's something that not everyone gets to.
Right. Yeah, definitely. That's at the end of the day what was most important for us. So
yeah, no. And so now going back to the dual sport kind of athlete thing of it, in all of that, when did you pick up stock car racing, and why that too?
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's Mom's fault. She let my dad and I go to the Dells one night by ourselves. I have no idea why she thought that was a good idea. And then, we looked at, I shouldn't say we, my dad thought, maybe a pure stock or something would be fun. And so my mom's not completely innocent in this aspect, that then she's like, well, geez, if we're going to spend that much money and go pure stock racing, there's, limited late models, for this price. Why, wouldn't that be more fun? And well, Yeah, why not?
Heck yeah, Ma.
Of course you would. So I think she was kind of kicking herself for, suggesting that bright idea. But ended up, we went down and, gosh, I got to even think what year it would have been. 2000, man, I don't, 7? 2008? Something like 2007,
Okay.
probably the Dells limited late. And we went to the race Saturday night. We went and looked at Mark English's limited late model number 57 on, I think on Sunday, and we ended up buying it on Wednesday. Went to Left-Hander, bought a fire suit and a helmet, and then went to the Dells and practiced and went racing that next weekend. And I mean, with certainty, we had no clue what we were doing on all levels. It was not something we normally do. We usually plan things out a little bit better. This was just spur of the moment, just decided to dive in. And I mean, we didn't know what wedge was in the car. We didn't know what stagger was. My dad knew a little bit, but obviously sportsman racing, many years ago was a different level of a limited late. And we were jumped all in at that point and started there. So
yeah, and I mean, how much during those times? I mean, how much work? I'm gonna imagine you still had been tinkering with the sleds a little bit in this summer, is to stay on the top of that game as much as you were.
Yeah, we were, and thankful again. Obviously, kudos to my dad because he put in so much work that when the last race happened, we didn't slow down. We kept working on the sleds. We'd get our engine sent in. We had a plan. We kept working on the stuff that then we could kind of transition over.
Sure.
And early on in our stock car race and stuff, we were working on stuff. We didn't really know what we were doing. I mean,
Sure.
if we had to hang a nose on the car, you better plan on 2 weeks for us. I mean, my dad and I, it took us a long time. We were very rusty at it. We didn't know a whole lot, but we kept learning as we went, and that was fun. And it was, bonding time for him and I, working in the shop, and that's just what we did. You'd go to work, and at night you'd go to the shop every night. And if you had an off weekend where you weren't at the racetrack, you were still in the shop working on stuff. And so that's what we did, and again, it was, a lot of thanks to him and, being motivated to keep working on stuff and, to where you wouldn't necessarily fall behind or even in the fall time, as much as he'd have loved to just sit in a tree stand all day long, he'd maybe go sneak away and hunt for a little bit in the morning, but then, middle of the day is right back, working on stuff, or same deal at night, where it'd been pretty easy for him to, just kick up his feet and relax. He kept grinding away on everything and, essentially kind of kept everything rolling to keep us at that time racing year round, I guess, really.
Yeah. So jumping into the stock car thing and, and you got good at that too. So what was that like trying to figure that out for you? Like how did, how was that?
Yeah, a lot of talking to people, a lot of people. I would ask questions repeatedly to people and everyone that would talk to me because, like I said, I was trying to learn how to put wedge in the car. I was trying to, not have to take my shoes and socks off to figure out stagger and counting, like all aspects of it. Like I said, I mean it when I say I literally knew nothing.
Because you didn't do a go-kart or anything like that. I mean, just limited late model.
A limited late model, yeah. So, figuring out stagger and everything. So if anybody would talk to me, I always listened. So I wanted to listen and learn as much as possible about what rebound meant or what a shock change could do or what wedge is or stagger and trailing arm angles and everything that went with it. So I would try and use that as my tool that, I would talk to people and listen to what they had to say. And if they were kind enough to share something with me, I obviously appreciated it and listened to what they had to say. And with the limited late stuff, obviously, the Mike Eady, Rich Schumann, those guys at that time were the ones that were super helpful, always lending a hand or giving pointers and kind of trying to guide us in that right direction at that point. And with that, we were always the last ones, I feel like, to leave the track at the Dells at night. It'd always be us and Rich Schumann and Mike Eady lined up, and then they'd shut the lights off, and away we'd go and head home every night, I feel like that. And probably Litchfields, they were always there pretty late. And, Nick Nolden and that crew, them were kind of always the five trailers that were always left late at night. So had a lot of fun on Saturday nights at the Dells.
Yeah, and when did you make the step up to a super late model?
Boy, I don't know exactly what year. I want to say maybe 2011. I
Okay.
ended up going and racing for Brad Dahmer over at Slinger. So we did that for a few
Okay.
years, and that was kind of my first step into a super late.
Okay.
So ran at Slinger, full time there for a while. Got fortunate enough to do the Slinger Nationals. Had fun at that. I mean, Slinger's just an amazing track. I mean, how can a person not love Slinger? To watch, to race at. All levels of Slinger.
Yeah.
Slinger has history, and really, really cool place there. So we did that, and then went and did a couple races for 5K Motorsports. We went to New Smyrna for Speed Weeks, and we went to Memphis and did I think it was an ASA Challenge Series race there. That was a great car at that time.
Sure.
Did that and ended up buying one of 5K's super lates, and then started kind of running, weekly at State Park, Plover, and Marshfield at that time. So
Gotcha.
that was kind of the transition.
Gotcha. And I remember, I think the first time I ever heard of that team, I think like Brett Moffitt was running for him. I remember running up at Oktoberfest with that. Yeah.
Yeah. Brett did a lot of that, and Rowley was their crew chief.
Okay.
So he had a big hand in that. And had fun. Like I said, that was kind of that next big step, and it was a huge step. It was something that I didn't have much knowledge in that way as far as going to I think Memphis was 3/4 mile track, so obviously a lot bigger than racing at the Dells or Slinger, and just the aspects of same deal. Aerodynamics and being able to stay in line to pick up essentially a little draft or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
That's another level of learning and learning curve to go with it.
Sure. Now I remember you winning, I think a Memorial Day race at Plover, right?
Yeah, I don't remember what year, but they always on Mondays on the hottest day of the year.
Yeah, always.
The 99 lapper there, the trickle 99.
99 degrees.
Yeah, that's what I felt like, and everybody get out of their car, their cheeks were rosy red, and just burned out with heat exhaustion. And so that was a warm one that year. We ended up winning it, and that was kind of like our first, I should say, bigger super late win.
Okay.
Honestly, one of my very few. I didn't have many that way, so that one was pretty special. Pretty exciting. Obviously now Plover's kind of a close track for me.
Sure.
And one that I had fun with at a lot of times. I always enjoyed going there, with everything that they had. It's kind of a small version of Slinger with the banking in a way.
Yeah. Are there any other larger wins that we're missing in the stock car?
No, not really. I mean, we had decent, runs, a couple wins at Marshfield on some weekly shows, but nothing bigger, none of the big specials or anything like that, So
you spent a few years running the ASA Midwest Tour and all that, right?
Yeah, we did that. We had okay runs, nothing phenomenal by any means, but like I said, we had some good showings there. We had couple of decent qualifying efforts, specifically like that Milwaukee Mile when they had just, I don't even remember, 78 cars or whatever it was. We qualified really good for that. So for us to go to the Milwaukee Mile, have a good run was special. We went to Newton, Iowa, and actually, was really fast.
That was a cool track.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun there. We ran decent. We ended up breaking a shifter linkage, towards the end, kind of derailed what could have been a decent finish, not a winning finish by any means like that, but for us, and what we knew, that was a good one. Marshfield, if the Midwest Tour would go there, we'd be a little bit more competitive. Obviously, had a few more laps there, where we would run, more in the top 8 or whatever like that. And same with State Park there, had some decent runs there as well.
Sure. And how long did you keep going in the stock car for? Because you raced a little bit longer, didn't you, or no?
We were actually done with that, I think, about that same time that summer before. So the last couple of years of the stock cars, we'd kind of just pick 5 or 6, more important races. So we'd go to Wausau to the flip race in the summertime. We'd do that one. Obviously like the Midwest Tour one at Marshfield when they were going. So I'd try and pick up that one. Like the Plover one I liked doing. So some of those, I had fun with that. We kind of just wanted to pick and choose our schedule, and we were still wide open, snowmobile racing. So, that was when, like I said, I wanted to kind of keep the focus a little bit more on the snowmobile stuff. And
Sure.
I was happy and okay with doing, 6-7 races a year and just kind of picking and choosing when you want to do it. I mean, you know how it is. If you lock in on a schedule, it is a grind. You're very committed. You get a good crew to help you, and we did that for a while. We'd run State Park on Thursday nights. We'd come to Plover Friday nights and Marshfield on Saturdays, and usually Plover and State Park would kind of alter weeks. So you're still running 2 nights a week. That's a lot of hours in the shop, some late nights, and it's a big commitment doing that.
Yeah, no, yeah, for sure. Now, being that you backed off on the stock car stuff a little bit while you're still doing the snowmobile, if you had to pick a discipline that was your favorite, which one is it?
I mean, obviously the snowmobiles.
I was assuming.
Had a little bit more success there.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you gotta pick the snowmobiles for sure. I'm not gonna lie. Right now, I like the warm weather. Stock car racing sounds fun. Thinking back, like snowmobile racing, the cold, the snow, like the elements. Oh, the stock car racing's where it's at. I like it warm and everything that goes with it there. So I didn't mind that. And
sure.
Yeah, it's like any sport and, any form of racing, that competition level keeps going. And I didn't have any more knowledge than the basics. So, once you get to the super lates, it really, especially these days, I feel like you almost got to be an engineer to be a good, super late team.
A lot of technology, yeah.
There's so much technology at any of the big shows, you really got to have a good understanding of what's going on. And that I definitely didn't know. Obviously, had help, Brandon Selly was a huge asset. Him and I have been great friends over the years. He was always very willing to help me with the super light stuff. And then Chris Wimmer was the other one. He helped me out a ton, I called him, I was kind of nervous to call him, called Chris Wimmer and asked him if he'd build me a set of shocks. And he's like, yeah, absolutely. You can come up tomorrow. And I'm like, wow, all right. I thought that was the greatest thing ever. And Chris and I have been good friends ever since. And he said, built me a set of shocks. And he's probably only on his 5th Monster Energy of the day at that point. So he was doing good. But so, yeah, and that's kind of how it went from there. And those were some of the people that I, like I said, would try talking to a lot.
Sure. Now, I know the one guy that I know pretty well that would always hang around your snowmobile camp was Bobby Donahue. How did, I saw him at the races quite a few times with you guys. How did you kind of form a relationship with him too?
Yeah, it started pretty early on, kind of reached out to him, for a sponsorship, deal, at a young age. And Bobby would always stop in the trailer at Eagle River on Friday nights. He'd be up there with all his buddies, snowmobile, and he'd stop in and, give a couple good pep talks and, away he'd go. And it just kind of kept progressing to where, the conversations got to, as I got older too, where we could talk more and more and kind of kept, inching a little bit more involvement and helping us and on the sponsorship side, but also that connection with Skidoo. He was able to kind of help us build that relationship with them and what he had going. And then obviously, like I said, in 2014 when things were starting to head in a good direction, Bobby had a little bit more free time to where he was able to come to some races, give input, give guidance. I mean, he's been around this his whole life. He knows, he probably knows the make and model of a snowmobile hearing it a mile away, that when you get at the racetrack, he could kind of tell, like, boy, it seemed like it was over revving a little bit. Did you notice that as well? Or, maybe our gearing was off, or, it's just that extra set of eyes and ears that could kind of help give ideas of what to try next and kind of keep the team heading in a good direction, and then the driver's standpoint of it as well, because he was not only hands-on on his sleds, but he was obviously a good driver that then he could give input on the driving side of things, line choices, where to line up on the line, just things that, a racer would see. He could kind of help give feedback to me, and ultimately that's what helped. And he was there. He was on the infield for when we won our WC in 2015. He was giving me, how far back, and stuff like that. And obviously, cheerleading me on and everything that goes with it. So, that was cool, obviously knowing him as a world champion, that then he got to have his name on our sled and be in the infield and have hands on, and us winning a WC, even though it's not a WC to his name, it's still a part of him.
Right, you still got some pride in it, right?
In there. So, we had a lot of fun that night after the race, and like I said, it was good memories there, and just again another friendship that'll last a lifetime.
Yeah, for sure. Now, the other thing I know you got to do, and I have always wanted to go and check out the Suai 500 because it looks like one of the coolest things to go and watch. How did you end up? I know you end up going and starting doing some of that endurance racing like that. What was that like compared to, the ice, the ice oval stuff and the pro champ that you had been doing? Obviously, a little bit different discipline of snowmobile racing, but still a mile-long track at the Suai. And
Yeah, I was kind of just reading about it online and thought it was something, unique. It's a very unique race up there. Like I said, it's a mile track, kind of like an Eagle River, paperclip, but stretched out a mile. The sleds are different. It's an endurance, and just kind of, something different. So I thought it was fun. I was good friends with Joel Diamond and his brother Mitch there, where, talking about it, and they kind of came from that a little bit more of the Mira race and enduro world. And so every weekend I feel like I'd see Mitch and Joel and I'd ask them this question or talk about that. And then finally it's like, well, hey, if you guys ever would want to go, I'd really be interested in it. And again, didn't know much about it. And Mitch Diamond ended up getting a sled and called me and asked to ride with him at the Sioux. And that was kind of that first part of the Suai 500, and just kind of got our toes wet. And then I think that next year I didn't have anything lined up, and I got a call from Yamaha to ride with Ross Erdman. Went that year and rode with Ross on a Yamaha at the Sioux. And then that next year, kind of same deal, full circle, but ended up matching up with Joel Diamond and Dwayne Bauer. And so Joel and I kind of rode together then that next, little bit there at the Sioux, and did a few more of the enduro races, at Lincoln, Kinross, Caro, and those type of Mira tracks when we had an off weekend from champ racing. And that essentially is kind of when things started going good in our champ racing, was when I started enduro racing. Again, it helped me physically get a little bit more in tune with it, and just more seat time on a sled ultimately is kind of how it came about.
Okay, so I mean, you think that paid dividends and helped a little bit by doing the endurance sled, but and still kind of helped on the other side of things?
Yeah, I do. Like I said, those, and at that time, you'd run Kinross and Lincoln. They were 500 lappers on a half mile. So I mean, you're out there all day long, beating your body. And I remember Kinross there after the race. It's it's kind of a goofy track, and we just didn't have our handlebars quite right. But I ended up with this huge blister on my hand, and I was heading into when we won Eagle River, and I thought, man, oh man, this is, I hate to sound like Sally, but this is a bad place to have one heck of a blister.
Yeah, you want things to feel right, and
right. So I had that thing all kind of taped up and trying to make sure I was ready to go. And as it turned out, I'm like, well, that actually helped. It helps really whip me into shape right before Eagle River and get that little extra, workout in, and just, riding a sled. At the end of the day, you can go to the gym and train as much as you want, but your best training is right on a sled. You're going to
get the motor up with the RPMs, and
So, and that helped, and kind of led into a great year, obviously on the champ sleds and enduro racing. We won the Michigan Cat 500, enduro race in Lincoln, had some really good runs, and just kind of all in all a great year on both sides of it.
Sure. No, that's cool. Yeah, I've always wanted to get up to the Suai 500 and check that out. I mean, I've seen, it's like those guys are up there running and the track just gets beat down to nothing, and they're still just flying around there, and there's looks like a rhythm section in the corners, and it looks like a heck of a time.
Yeah, it is. And those guys are talented because you gotta be set up for the long haul. 500 miles, track changes so quick, like you said, that even the cross country guys, they got a lot of talent when it gets rough, and how they can change their riding style to acclimate to the bumps and the the line changing and everything that goes with it. And they get a huge following up there. The hill's packed. Everybody has a great time. It's a long event. You're up there all week, and just kind of building for this, and that takes another level of team sport because you're doing live pit stops, fueling, ski changes, everything that goes with it. So there's so many things that can take you out of the race, but also put you right back in it too. You're never really out of the hunt, and it truly is a marathon to be there at the end and get to the final distance.
Yeah, and how many riders would you have on your team, and how many laps would you do yourself?
Yeah, so it kind of always depended. A lot of times in a perfect world, you'd have your two primary drivers and then kind of a backup driver.
Okay.
Sometimes you'd rotate through the three, but ideally, I feel like the best outcome was your two main ones, because you didn't want to be off the sled too long because the track would change so quick that you'd kind of lose that rhythm.
Sure.
So, you'd be on the sled, anywhere from, say 50 to 70 laps at a time, up there. Obviously, fuel mileage was a big one, and so you'd have to kind of play that game a little bit of knowing when to pit. Sometimes you'd go plow to plow, and usually plows were 100-lap segments, so just kind of depended on how the day was unfolding and where you were at and elements. I mean, I've been up there when it's super warm and super cold and everything in between. You just up there, you never know. I mean, some years there's snowbanks, super high, and other years, recently they had not hardly a drop of snow up there, and just you never know what to expect up there.
Yeah, the good old Midwest winter weather. Yeah. How did you come up with, or where did Miracle Racing come from? That was always your guys' race team name. I was always curious on that.
Yeah, so it started early on. My parents weren't sure if they were going to be able to have children or not. So obviously, once I came along, my mom would kind of always joke if I was getting into trouble, not too often, try not to, but she'd always joke and say, well, I guess he's our miracle, have to deal with him. So then, then the Miracle Racing kind of stuck with that, they were thankful that they were able to have children, and that, at that point it was a miracle. So call it Miracle Racing.
Oh, that's cool. That's cool. They have a cool story behind having the team name there.
Yeah.
Yeah, not too much when to Colin Refner Motorsports. That one, it's easy to find a name for that.
Yeah.
No, that's neat. I was always curious on that. How'd you get your number 58?
So actually, when we were kitty cat racing, I was 00, and had that, and I don't remember why. I think we just kind of liked it, and it was something that was available. And then when we started racing more in the junior stuff, they said that that time zeros couldn't be entered in the computer, so I had to come up with a different one, and there's about 10 options, and I'm like, well, my birthday's May 8th, 58, perfect, we'll, roll with that. So yeah. Nothing too scientific behind it after that, so just, it's easy to remember my birthday at that point.
Yeah. Oh, that's cool. So at the kind of both at the tail end of, your racing career, Jimmy John started showing up on, your sled and on your car. Now you're a franchise owner of Jimmy John's. How'd you get hooked up with Jimmy John's kind of briefly, and how, that kind of escalating into, franchise owner?
Yeah, so it worked out good, and obviously I owe it all to racing. So after we won Eagle River in 2015, Jimmy was there, and made a point of saying, we want him next year. We want to sponsor him. And I got a call in the springtime that they wanted to put something together and sponsor us. So we started kind of early in the springtime discussing it. We obviously had a lot of great sponsors, ones that, have been friends forever, again, that, are people we've known for a long time, but we never really had that, big step up in a sponsorship. So,
sure.
That was new for us too. You're trying to work essentially a proposal together to figure out what was fair. We didn't know. We, kind of always, thanks to my parents and a lot of very loyal sponsors, we're able to kind of do it ourselves. And, so that was unique for us, that then we had to figure out, like, what do we ask for? We don't know. I mean, what's fair? I have no idea. I don't think I'm worth nothing, but I guess, they saw some value in calling me, and, put our first kind of deal together, and they came back and essentially said yes right away, which blew our mind. But the one hang up is they wanted the sled to be red and black, and we had been running the high vis, forever, and that was my dad's thing. And he's like, I want to be able to see, on the track, and so he liked that, and he's like, no, I'm not doing red and black, and we're with Skidoo, and no, we're not doing that. And I'm like, are you sure? Like, do you maybe should consider this? And I'm kind of thinking, I don't know if that's the smartest thing. He's like, nope, we've, done it ourselves with our current sponsors. We don't have to do that. All right, so we, kind of did a counter and said, we want it to stay high vis. We want to have Jimmy John's on there, and changed a few things around, and they came back and said yes, that they'd make the exception, that they were okay with it and understood why, and and with Skidoo's involvement and everything that went with it. So we were obviously still super excited about it. And then from there, I was kind of at a crossroads with work. I didn't know what I wanted to do. My dad was kind of getting where he'd maybe like to consider retirement and kind of what's next. And then I'm like, maybe I want to be a Jimmy John's owner. So I got looking at the franchise portion of it. Same deal. My mom thought I was nuts. She's like, you've never worked in a kitchen in your life. You wouldn't have a clue what you're doing. And she wasn't wrong. I didn't think I would. But I'm like, maybe this would be something fun. I think it would make sense, and set up my first time, went down, met with them, discussed some locations, and ended up opening our first store in Plover in 2018, and just been hooked on it ever since. And I can joke about it now and go, Jimmy spent money on me, and I in turn reinvested it back with him, and I got what I consider a great career out of it, and feel very fortunate to be with Jimmy John's and essentially working with them, on a bigger level at this point.
Oh yeah, that's awesome to see something in racing turn into something like that for a person's career. And hey, to your dad's defense, that high vis yellow definitely stands out. He was not wrong.
Yeah, he definitely liked it. Like I said, that I couldn't believe, when he's like, no, we're not changing color. It's high vis. And I'm like, oh man, are you listening to yourself at this time? Like, I think we should think about all options at this point. And he was pretty stuck on it, and obviously I'm thankful that he did. It was a smart thing on his part, and it was kind of our little signature thing, I guess, at that point, where at that time we were kind of, one of the few that just had that kind of all high vis, and we liked that portion of it.
Yeah. So Cardell Potter walks into a Jimmy John's out of state. What are you ordering?
I don't know. I'm pretty boring. I don't even know. I guess I'm basic, BLT with cheese.
Okay.
You can't go wrong with that. So
getting a cookie and chips too, or?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely.
All right.
Not racing anymore. I can have that stuff, so we're good to go.
I was waiting to ask that question.
Yeah. It's I like it a lot. Like you said, it's different now when I have access to it every day. So it's something different there. And Jimmy John's as a whole has been great to work with. So obviously when they were sponsoring us, working with them was fun on trying to see what we could do to help them. And then, like I said, then it came out that, the other way around, where I'm trying to, prove that, hey, I think I can be a store owner, would you accept me? And, what's the next process? And with that, like I said, I knew nothing about it. And I got committed to where I went down to Champaign, Illinois, and I was down there for 3 weeks and did training in the stores and did that. And then I went to Sherryville, Indiana, and did another 4 weeks of training there. And like I said, I was hands-on, I could do everything from start to finish, and, kind of fell in love with it. And like I said, everything came full circle to where I ended up with, a full-time career out of it. So.
Oh, that's cool. That's cool.
Yeah.
Now, thinking about some of the racing stuff, what was your favorite tracks, both on the snowmobile side and on the stock car side?
That's a good question. I would say for the snowmobiles, obviously Eagle River for sure.
Okay.
You can't beat Eagle River with just everything that goes with it. It's unique. You'd use braking, still fast, banking in the corners, spectators. So that one obviously was right at the top. And then one that I went to at the end that I had a lot of fun at, I wish I had one more opportunity at. That's maybe one small regret, is one more opportunity there was Valcour.
Okay.
That one's very unique. Just again, same, a super exciting atmosphere there. A lot of people out there, obviously Skidoo's back door, and the racetrack is very racy and very fast. So that was probably my top two for the snowmobiles. And the stock cars, Slinger. It's
Sure.
just wild there. Slinger is so fast, so racy. Um, that one's hard to beat, I would say.
Yeah. No, so this last year was the first time I went and I've watched the Nationals. Had never raced there, and I ran there in the Midwest truck, and we had some issues there that day, but I was like, it was a track that I went to. I was like, man, I can't believe I waited this long in my racing career to come here. I'm like, this is pretty freaking cool. I'm like, I couldn't imagine what it was like in a super late. I'm like, just, when people talk about like, I can't remember what fighters in a gymnasium or whatever, like, yeah, that's what it would be like.
Right. Yeah. That's why anytime, like if somebody has an onboard camera of somebody, specifically in a super late, but an onboard at Slinger, for a qualifying lap, and you get to see their hands working inside the car, it kind of gives a little bit more perspective of how cool Slinger truly is. They're up on the wheel and just absolutely giving her every inch of the track. And the banking, you don't realize the banking, on camera. Yeah, it looks like there's a lot of banking until you look over the ledge and you see it. It doesn't give it justice. You got to be there in person. I always liked going to nationals in person because, don't get me wrong, it's fun watching it online and everything, but when you're there in person, it's just another level of excitement seeing those cars going around and driving into the banking.
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, when it comes to the banking, I would 100% agree. Like, it's, and for anyone listening, like, you've seen Slinger online or whatever, it does not do it justice. You gotta go in person. That is for sure.
Yeah, definitely. That one's pretty cool to say the least.
Now, I never, whenever snowmobile guys went up to Canada, I never tuned into a lot of those races, and I never myself went to any of those tracks. What made Valcourt racy? What was, in comparison to, like Ironwood or, Eagle River, what was the difference there?
Yeah, that's a good question there. The one corner is a lot tighter than the other one, and the other one's real wide. So I don't even,
But it was flat though, right?
Yeah, there was a little bit of banking, not a ton. So you'd kind of, 1 and 2 was a little bit more normal, but 3 and 4, you'd drive it in and you'd almost drive up really wide in the center and then have to cross back over, to carry speed. Well, then as the track would get rougher, then there was ways of backing up the entering in wider, cutting across lower in the middle and coming off higher. There's just a lot of uniqueness there. Yeah. And I was only there the one time and I kept learning it and, trying to get better, but, it's really a kind of a driver's track. Like, you definitely are very line sensitive. Don't get me wrong, there's other tracks that are line sensitive, but if you're off just a smidge, you're not going to be completely out to lunch, where I felt like Valcourt made it racy, that if you were off a little bit on your line and your line selection, you were going to see it going down the front stretch. Somebody would go blowing right by you, and, that made it racy to where you could pass. And I liked those kind of tracks where you could pass and, make it racy in that aspect.
The one snowmobile track that I had gone to that in my mind looked racy in that kind of like, line differential aspect was Alexandria, Minnesota. That one and watching them guys just fly around there, that was an exciting track to me to watch.
Yeah, that one was, and to think there too. You're wide open around there. You hardly would let off. You just burp it getting into the corner and right back to the gas, wide open. And the weird thing is mile per hour wise, it wasn't one of the fastest tracks. You automatically think, well, you're wide open, it's got to be one of the fastest. But there's so much banking and so much corner that you'd scrub off, a lot of speed that you couldn't build the speed that a Valcourt or Ironwood. Ironwood was a big one for big speed. You would build a lot of speed at Ironwood.
Yeah.
That one was very quick. But I think ultimately Alexandria, with the banking and how much you're turning, you would scruff off a little bit of speed, but then that made it to where you're wide open and you'd have to just keep the momentum rolling, that you couldn't hardly break any speed that way.
Sure. Now we were talking a little bit before we even got rolling. So when's the last time you were actually at a snowmobile race?
Oh boy. I did go to the 525 2 years ago, and other than that, since my last race, that's the only one I went to for snowmobiles. And stock car, I did not make Slinger Nationals this year, and I went with Brandon Selly to the Labor Day one at Plover, I think was my last one. He went on that 100-degree day, I think.
Sure.
And was out there, so I went and hung out with him at the racetrack, and maybe one time at the Dells with Mike Eady. And other than that, not too many. I do like going to Slinger Nationals, watching it in person. So if it works out, I try and sneak down there for that one. That's always one that I feel I would try to. And other than that, I just haven't got to too many. I stay in touch with it. I follow along online. But I'm probably not going to go to 20 races a year or nothing like that anymore. I think that ship set sail. So
yeah, no, it's yeah, no, I hear you there. Yeah, it's one of the things. It's when you're in their race, and it's like I feel like I'd either have to be like really ingrained helping somebody, or if I'm not racing myself, it's hard to go be a fan, multiple times a year, anyways. But maybe that's a fault of my own. But I don't know.
Definitely. I would love to get back to the Sioux sometime to watch. I know, like, you and I are both friends with Cody there, and Cody and I usually talk about the Sioux a lot, and I know he's always kind of wanted to go up there. So I wish.
When is that in the wintertime? I feel like anytime I've like thought about it, it's like, oh, the Sioux's this weekend. I'm like, well, yeah, I'm not gonna make it.
Yeah, I think it's next weekend is when they run it. So a lot of the teams will be heading up there this Sunday already to do that and get ready for it. So, someday I'd maybe if I had the right group of people, go up and spectate for that one again. I would like to go back to the Snowball Derby and watch that one in person again. I was fortunate I got to go down with Chris Wimmer that one year and work on and help him in the pits there. And it's a very neat experience. So that's just one that there's so many good quality guys that end up, just because it's Snowball Derby, end up going to that one, that I would want to go. I talked my parents into going down there a couple of years ago, and I know they had a lot of fun. So someday, hopefully, I can sneak back down there and watch that again.
Now, did you ever race that track in a stock car?
No, I never did that one. Yeah, that's another level.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that and especially these days, like we were talking earlier on, you almost got to have an engineer on your team, or you got to be racing 25, 30 races a year to stay up to date with it. But they put on a good show. I thought this year's results were
questionable.
Yeah, very questionable.
Yeah.
It'd be worth chatting about. I don't know if I necessarily agree with what I saw. So I believe, as it said, a dark cloud got put over it, so I could agree a little bit there. But still, knowing that it is the biggest super late model race, it would be one that a person would still want to go watch at least.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's it's cool to go and see some Northerners whoop up down there. So it's no matter who it is from up here, it's cool to see when they go down there and do that.
Yeah, definitely, and it's always good when they can hold them to it down there.
Yeah. Gosh, anything else? What else kind of consumes your time nowadays if you're not racing? Obviously, how many Jimmy John stores do you have?
Yeah, so up to six locations.
Okay.
So it's keeping us busy there. Obviously spending time, with my parents and grandparents, still doing as much as possible. Like to get out fishing as much as possible. Anything hunting, just a lot of outdoor time stuff. So have a girlfriend where she enjoys fishing, and get out with her and do as much as I can, and spending time with my daughter and everything there that goes with that. So enjoy that time while they're little. So capitalizing on that. I don't know if it's a good idea, but I got her a 120 there. My parents did.
This could be my next question.
Of course, it was a Skidoo, and she does really good on it. So she has a lot of fun. She's a good listener. She understands, that if you say we gotta look out for, Gramps' markers in the driveway, we can't hit them. She knows what that means, and she's aware of it. So, just set it up real safe, real slow, just something that kind of, get her into, being in the outdoors, motorsports, snowmobiling, you just go have fun in the yard with it. That's all it is at that point. And I got the, they're shut off ready to go in my hand just in case.
Oh, yeah.
So
yeah. Does Grandpa still got the jig in the garage?
He does still have it. Yeah. He's got it there. I hope we don't cross that path. Maybe dance and swim lessons or whatever she wants to do. I'm good with at that point. So, hard to not be all in when you do
Yep.
any form of racing. So whatever she wants to do in life is perfectly fine by me. We'll have as much fun as we can along the way, and for now, keep it simple and snack time and hanging out and doing all those fun things.
Right.
So.
Keep it simple and easy. Yeah,
Exactly.
exactly. I know that's the one thing I've probably said it before, but no one's ever lied to me about, and I wish they would have, is how fast they grow up. It's like, where did that time go?
Exactly. Yeah, it does. It truly does. It goes by really quick, and it's fun watching them grow.
Yeah.
With every portion of it, just the little things. Even last year when she was on her 120, I thought she did good, and then this year it's like, oh man, she's understanding a little bit more, and everything that goes with it, and so. Hopefully I don't need to buy a trail sled for myself or anything. Like I said, I don't know if I can handle the cold anymore. So for now, the yard's good enough.
So you don't do any trail riding or anything? Okay.
No, nothing. Just never had time. And
Okay.
so I never owned a trail sled. Never.
Oh, so you never even really owned one? Okay.
Yeah.
No kidding.
One time with my buddy Jason there trail riding, and I went with Donahue one time. That's it. They're my only 2 times trail riding ever, and I don't know if I would, maybe if somebody called me, I would, but honestly, they'd probably have to twist my arm to talk me into it. So I'll meet them at wherever the destination is. And call it good.
Yeah, I'll see you inside where it's warm.
Yeah, I'm a lightweight these days. I like it 75 in the house and about 85 outside most days. So.
That's funny. Gosh, yeah, never owned a trail sled. Wouldn't have guessed that. But yeah, if you're always racing on the weekends, why? No time for one.
Yeah, that's just it. And that's how it was, when we started with the kitty cats. My parents they thought, well, we'll trail ride on Saturdays and race just on Sundays, or it might have been vice versa. And then pretty quick we were racing Saturdays and Sundays, and they're like, well, great, now we can sell our trail sleds because we have no time for that, and just, racing Saturdays, Sundays all winter, and that was the end of their trail riding career as well, so...
Yeah, I think I ended my parents too, so.
Darn kids, right?
Yeah, what are you going to do?
Yeah, for sure.
Gosh. Well, man, I'm super glad we were finally able to make this all happen. It's been, like I said, awesome learning about all the stuff you did, snowmobile racing, and all at the same time as stock car racing, and talking about your accomplishments and what that was like for you, and everything that's gone along the way throughout your career and kind of the stuff you're into now. And just thanks a ton for coming and taking the time.
Yeah, likewise. Certainly appreciate you doing this. Like I said, this is cool. There's not too many people that are putting forth the effort to want to talk to people like us. I mean, we're small town, people doing what we love to do, and there might only be a few people that want to hear our stories, but it takes a person like you to put in the effort. So we definitely, everybody I think appreciates that as well, and recognize it. So appreciate the time and the invite for sure.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm sure there'll be quite a few people tuning into this one. Should be a good one. So, all right. Thanks again, Cardell. Appreciate it.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you for listening in to Speed and Grease. If you're a returning listener, I appreciate you tuning into another episode. And if it was your first time tuning into the show, I hope you enjoyed it and want to keep coming back for more. And if you haven't already, make sure you head on over to Facebook, Instagram, like and follow us on one of those platforms, wherever you prefer, even on X as well. And if you watch a lot of stuff on YouTube, make sure you head on over to YouTube, subscribe to our channel there to stay up to date on everything. And also, if you want, give us a rating and review over on Spotify or Apple Podcasts as well. Thank you again for tuning in. I really appreciate it, and we'll catch you in the next one.